Welcome back to part 2 of the lecture. We'll talk more about gender theory now you've got some of the introductions under your belt. So before we start talking about stereotypes and I guess gender norms and expectations that are most prevalent, I want to talk about the role of biological determinism first, as I think this is really an important historical piece of context for you to have around where these sex and gender and racial norms come from. So primarily, this deterministic norm that we have around gender being a natural expression of sex comes from a few hundred years ago, around the same time as colonisation of Australia, the sort of following the Age of Enlightenment and the rise of science as a discipline. This particular, historical moment and process from there on were, you think about Darwin, people trying to understand humans and the natural world and trying to understand the differences and operations across animals, across the natural world and across humans. So biological determinist perspectives saw that racial, class and gender differences were sort of natural or inherent expressions of inferiority or of hierarchy and of sort of the subjective dominance of people, mainly white men, above all other kinds of people as being superior, or the base norm against women, against whose women's bodies were judged. For example, people of lower class status were seen as being just poorer quality humans, and of course the same was done most violently and most in a most widespread way around racialization, where anyone who was not white or had different color skin was seen as being inferior and having a range of problems associated. And this is important because social norms and inequalities were seen as being just the natural expressions of inherent human differences. This is a really important political point, because if you create a theory like biological determinism where European men's bodies are human, everyone else is sort of a poor variation of that, you can, and they did, justify a huge array of violence, genocide, the worst, atrocities of human history, certainly in the last few hundred years, have been excused or legitimated by this theoretical perspective of natural dominance. So this standard was really legitimized during this historical period. Scientific theories like phrenology, social Darwinism formed the basis of the ways that societies were able to justify carrying out slavery, genocide, colonization. I'm sure you're learning about this in other subjects, but it's really important in relation to gender and sex as well. And I think it's really important to frame that everything I'm going to say from here on is around how stereotypes and gender norms that we have are really sort of premised still on these biological essentialist categories. So, and I, as a sociologist, and I'm a sociologist of gender, are really interested in looking at how these are a real problem and should be much broader, or should be thought about much more differently. So the stereotype of masculinity is that they are inherently strong, protective, assertive, competitive, don't care about appearance, intellectually rational, logical, or unemotional, preoccupied with sex. These kinds of stereotypes create a particular kind of hegemonic masculinity, as we'll have a look at, and are always contrasted in opposition to women. So women are seen as being soft, like the opposite. This is the binary thing again: soft and understanding, caring and nurturing. vain or preoccupied with appearance, just as a natural thing, not something that women are rewarded for, which of course they are. Intellectually limited, not really suited for public life or more rational domains. This has been still said sort of continually about women in public life. Not so good at practical things, or as less concerned with physical sex and more concerned with romantic love. So you can see here that the kinds of oppositions that are being set up is to be one, you must disavow the other, particularly for men. Any sort of performances or attributes of nurturing, care, caring about appearance, sort of emotionality or romance are seen as being sort of not manly or not masculine, and that causes huge problems for men and boys. And of course there are very well known problems with why the kind of exclusions of masculine pursuits, so-called, mean that women are seen as sort of taking up space where they shouldn't be if they are leaders in public fields. Or, there's, of course, a whole range of issues concerning motherhood and expectations of being more suited to raising children that plays out in very material ways in society still. So, of course, these are stereotypes, as I said in the beginning. No one really fits either stereotype, but they're very recognisable to us, right? Like, we recognise these in popular culture throughout society. They surround us. And you will probably notice that they're really sort of, whether or not men and women meet these categories, many people around us encourage us to align with these stereotypes or to lean into one that fits your supposed gender or sex-based identity based on what people read from looking at you. So this is really about how social gendered roles are maintained through these stereotypes and through, I guess, the ways that people around us overtly encourage us, particularly when we're young, or more tacitly encourage us to be particular ways through popular culture. So these seem natural, and there are many rewards, social rewards, cultural rewards, for meeting these gender identity categories for cisgendered people. But many people don't feel comfortable aligning with them. It may be strategic to align with them sometimes because you'll have smoother relationships with people. But obviously there are huge exclusions and issues connected to the inequalities in histories that I've already spoken to you about. There's this, of course, sense that there's a complementarity between the binaries, yin and yang, opposites, positive and negative, night and day. Of course, there are all kinds of different binaries and complementarities in life, but man and woman are not essential categories of biological and social difference. That is the main point of this lecture and this whole week. So in terms of how gender and our sort of sense of who we are as a gendered self develops, there are sociobiologists who believe gender traits are biologically determined, but most sociologists agree that gender is a socially learned behaviour primarily. So most appeals to biology, as sociologist of gender Raymond Connell argues, are really unfounded or based on speculation, or probably more realistically based on kind of upholding the social order, upholding the dominant norms of society. The ways we learn it are really complex. We learn it from birth, we learn it from before we're born even, with the ways that our parents are preparing to raise us. And it's more common now for parents to raise gender neutral children or to let them choose which gender they would like to align with as they get older. This is something that certainly wasn't around when I was a kid and in my generation, but as a parent now, that this is becoming more common. So people are becoming more aware of the role of socialization of gender roles and its power for young people and children. So we're socialized along gendered lines. You only need to go to Kmart or to any really large store or even the supermarket, to look at the ways that gender is made for us, or we're being told what gender is through pink and blue, most sort of stereotypically. And it's interesting hearing the ways that gender is naturalised in childcare. I'm a parent of young children, and the ways that this happens so early and from other children. I remember one day my 3-year-old daughter came home and said she was never going to wear tracksuit pants again because someone said she looked like a boy. And I said that doesn't matter, but it really did matter even as a 3-year-old. So wanting to kind of create a gendered identity that's distinct is something that children do, but there's of course a whole society and culture ready to capture young people and children to help them align with the cisgendered identity, which of course has huge exclusions for those non-binary or transgender or gender diverse young people who do not align and do not need to align, but societally that's difficult because of the pressures around gender socialisation. So we're also socialised into conforming to gender roles and into heterosexuality. This is something that hasn't changed much at all really over the past 10 years or so in terms of, I guess, the social prevalence of seeing these kinds of distinctions around heterosexual gender norms being marketed to children. So this isn't just something that happens in childhood, it happens and continues into adulthood and in a range of different institutions. Anyone you would like to mention really, in relation to school life, in work life, through the media, through social relationships, acquaintances, basically all interactions. So obviously the more diverse range of interactions you can have around not being surrounded by only heterosexual relationships, around having gender diverse people in your life, these will obviously help to unsettle these strict binary gender roles and norms, which is occurring as well, which is good to see. So socialisation happens through many ways. There are physical sanctions and rewards. So boys are still told off for crying, whereas they're rewarded for just not making a sound if they get up and hurt themselves, when they hurt themselves. It's obviously through verbal encouragement or discouragement and being praised for, girls are often praised for sitting quietly, boys are praised for playing with trucks. All these things are really subtle and help to create, I suppose, the illusion of natural difference when often it is not at all that straightforward. And of course, children, young people and adults imitate behaviours and mannerisms from adults and the media, and particularly when there's so many rewards associated with performing gender in a cis way, then you can see that this is quite an effective way of maintaining the social gender order. So the family is the primary site of socialisation in social theory. It also happens really early in secondary forms of socialisation with childcare. Of course, it's very common and normal for children to be in childcare from, a very early age because women are in the workforce more. Men are in the workforce more too. Well, they just have always been there, but of course, anyone can be a parent. Doesn't have to be a woman. And of course, tertiary forms of socialisation include role models, the media, peers, just people in the street who will praise a girl's appearance. That happens from a very young age too, and from even before, when people are asking what the sex or gender of one's baby is going to be when they can see a pregnant person. So highly stereotypical gendered behaviour is everywhere in the media. People like to see it. People, again, like to see that have kind of social norms reinforced in popular media, at least. There are a range of other media that, of course, has more transgressive forms of gender portrayal and identity. But in terms of popular culture, the most mainstream commercial or popular forms of television continue to be highly stereotypical and particularly highly sexualized for women. So there's some great material there around tropes versus women in video games. There's some entertaining content there. And of course, gendered marketing is just such a hugely profitable sector. And this is an interesting video that will still be a really good example of exactly what we're talking about here. So there's a lot of sociological theory that's around how gender is not simply this natural pre-existing phenomena. It is constructed, it is done, it is something we perform, we play it like a role, even though that role feels so natural that it's just like breathing for many people. But gender is accomplished as something that we do in relation to others. We get reinforced through a range of cues that are overt or they're subtle, or body language. All of these things help us to align with or learn how to perform gender in a way that hopefully aligns with who we feel ourselves to be. But I think you might start to notice some tensions between what kinds of gender performances are socially rewarded or are transgressive, and the ones that you really feel yourself to be. There's a lot of tensions. So doing gender is a really important way of thinking about like the active ways that we participate in performing who we are in a gendered way. So this perspective assumes that differences between men and women are not biologically determined. They are made and done actively by all of us. And we don't have a lot of choice either. Like, we can resist these to a certain extent, particularly if it's very important for our well-being to do so. If we're gender diverse, non-binary or transgender, then these categories must be sort of transcended in order to live a healthy life. But it can be really difficult to do that. And we're all implicated in the same gendered kind of expectations. No one can really be outside of gender norms, but we're all positioned differently because of the gendered hierarchies and patriarchy, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail to come. So I'll see you in the next part of the lecture.